Healing isn't just about mindset. It's about environment. Because you can't outgrow your pain in the same place where it learned to survive. You're trying to become a new version of yourself, but you're surrounded by the voices that trained you to shrink. You're setting new goals while walking through the same rooms that made you believe you weren't worthy of any. And you wonder why it feels so hard, why change feels impossible, why your progress collapses the moment you start to rise. It's not because you're weak, it's because the space around you is still feeding the identity you're trying to shed. People talk about inner work like it's everything, and it matters, deeply. But here's what no one tells you. If your outer world constantly contradicts your inner growth, eventually one will break. And too often it's the growth that dies first. Not because it's fake, but because it's outnumbered. You can't stay where the wound was formed and expect to rise without resistance. The places where you first learned to doubt yourself, they echo, they anchor, they convince you to play small because they remember who you used to be, and they need you to stay that way. Maybe it's your home, maybe it's the people you call friends, maybe it's the job, the relationship, the silence in the room after you say your dream out loud and no one claps. Whatever it is, it keeps pulling you back. Not violently, not obviously, but subtly, through guilt, through obligation, through routines that numb your soul, one compromise at a time. And at some point, you have to ask, is this really growth, or is it survival dressed up as progress? Because real healing often starts with distance, with walking away, not to escape, but to breathe, to hear your own voice again. To create a space where your healing isn't constantly under threat. You can love people and still leave them. You can appreciate the past and still outgrow it, and you can fight for your future without dragging every piece of your old life into it. The most dangerous prisons are the ones you stop noticing, not because the bars disappeared, but because you got used to the view. That's what familiar pain does. It disguises itself as normal. It teaches you to flinch at freedom, because freedom feels unfamiliar. And when the human brain has to choose between comfort and change, it doesn't choose what's best, it chooses what's known. That's why we stay. In relationships that dull us, in jobs that drain us, in routines that make us feel invisible, we tell ourselves it's safer, that we're being responsible, that at least we know what to expect. But here's the truth. That's not safety. It's surrender. Your nervous system is wired to protect you, not to evolve you. So if you spent years walking on eggshells, you'll crave quiet, even if it comes with pain. If your childhood taught you that love must be earned through sacrifice, you'll keep overgiving, even if it destroys you. You'll call the chaos normal. You'll call the pain home. And the more time you spend in that space, the more it rewires your sense of self. You begin to believe that you're the problem, that you're too sensitive, too ambitious, too much, that maybe healing isn't for people like you, that maybe this compromise, this numbness, is all you're allowed to have. But ask yourself this: what if the problem isn't you, but the environment that keeps you questioning yourself? Familiar pain creates a loop, a cycle, a pattern so subtle you stop seeing it. You start managing symptoms instead of confronting causes. You set boundaries, but never enforce them. You dream, but only in silence. You post inspirational quotes, and then go back to tolerating what breaks you. Because breaking the loop would mean facing the unspoken fear. What if I leave, and I'm still not okay? That fear keeps millions stuck. But here's the paradox. Staying guarantees the very thing you're afraid of, because when you stay in environments that broke you, the wound doesn't just remain, it deepens. Slowly, quietly, until one day you wake up and realize you no longer recognize yourself. And that's the tragedy of familiar pain. It doesn't need to destroy you loudly, it just needs to keep you small. Because as long as you stay in survival mode, you'll never have the energy to rise. To break the cycle, you have to name it. You have to see the environment not as neutral, but as charged. Charged with memory, with tension, with patterns that whisper, "Don't grow too much. Don't become too free." Healing begins the moment you stop mistaking your cage for your comfort zone. And that moment, painful as it is the beginning of everything. Sometimes the hardest part of healing isn't the pain, it's the guilt. Because deep down, you know you've outgrown the place you're in. You feel it in your body, in the conversations that drain you, in the silence after you speak your truth and no one really hears it. But something stops you from walking away. Something whispers, "You owe them. You owe this. Don't be ungrateful." That's how loyalty turns into self-betrayal. When your need to stay loyal to others overrides your responsibility to yourself. When you keep watering connections that stopped growing years ago, not because you believe in them, but because leaving feels like abandoning a part of yourself. We're conditioned to stay, to be the bigger person, to not cause waves. And especially if you were raised in chaos, you were likely taught to be the fixer, to manage everyone's emotions except your own. So now, when you think about leaving a relationship, a job, a family pattern, you don't just fear the change, you fear the shame, the judgment, the label of selfish. But here's the truth. Leaving doesn't make you heartless. Staying when it's killing your spirit, that's the real betrayal. It's not selfish to choose peace. It's not cruel to stop shrinking so others can stay comfortable. In fact, every time you say yes to a life that stifles you, you're teaching others how to treat you and teaching yourself that your needs don't matter. Loyalty is beautiful when it's mutual, when it's rooted in respect. But when it becomes one-sided, when you're the only one compromising, the only one breaking to keep the peace, it stops being loyalty. It becomes a trap, a cycle of self-abandonment dressed up as devotion. And sometimes, the people around you won't understand your growth. Not because they're evil, but because your evolution threatens their comfort. You becoming whole reminds them of the parts of themselves they've chosen to ignore. And instead of rising with you, they try to pull you back. That's when you have to make a choice. Not out of anger, not out of ego, but out of clarity. Because the truth is, not everyone gets to walk with you into your healing. Some were only meant to be part of the survival chapter, not the freedom one. Walking away isn't giving up. It's giving yourself a chance to finally stop bleeding in places that never learned how to hold you. And that decision, painful, terrifying, liberating, is the first act of radical self-respect. We've been taught to fear the word escape, to associate it with cowardice, with giving up. But there's a difference between running from something and walking toward yourself. Not every exit is an escape. Some are arrivals at clarity, at freedom, at self-respect. There are places that will never let you grow because they only know the old version of you. People who only understand the version of you that kept quiet, made peace, played small. And no matter how much you evolve, those environments will pull you back, like gravity. Not because they hate you, but because your growth requires a shift they aren't willing to make. That's when you must realize, your healing is your responsibility, not a group project. It's not your job to convince people you've changed. It's your job to live it, even if it means leaving behind the ones who only loved the version of you that was easier to manage. Escaping the environment that broke you isn't giving up. It's refusing to keep rehearsing the pain. Every time you try to grow in a place that punished your authenticity, you fight a battle you didn't start, and one you weren't meant to win. Some fights are lost the moment you agree to stay in the ring. You don't owe your suffering to anyone's comfort. You don't have to justify choosing air after years of drowning. And you don't need permission to walk out of the fire when all that's left is ash. Because here's the truth. Wisdom looks like walking away before you shatter. It looks like protecting your future over defending your past. It looks like becoming someone your old life would no longer recognize and being proud of that. You'll lose people. You'll lose titles. You'll lose familiarity. But what you gain is bigger: your energy, your clarity, your alignment. And from that alignment, your real life begins. Let them call it selfish. Let them say you've changed. Because the version of you that stayed silent, stayed loyal, stayed hurting, that version already knows. Staying would have been the real betrayal. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're just becoming someone your old environment was never built to support. That discomfort you feel, that tension in your chest when you try to speak up, when you try to rest, when you try to rise, it's not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're expanding. And expansion always feels violent to what no longer fits. People will say you're selfish, that you've changed, that you think you're better, and maybe you are better. Not better than them, but better than who you used to be when you needed their approval to feel worthy. That's what growth is. The quiet separation from everything that kept you surviving but not thriving. It's saying goodbye to identities that were built on coping. It's grieving the comfort of fitting in, so you can rise into the power of standing alone. So if you're questioning whether to stay, whether to shrink, whether to make just one more compromise for the sake of peace, ask yourself, what would the healed version of me do? Not the scared version, not the loyal version, not the over-functioning, self-sacrificing, emotionally starved version, but the version of you that knows you're meant for more. The version that's been whispering to you in the quiet. That's not your ego. That's your evolution calling. You don't owe the world a performance. You don't owe your past a prison sentence. You owe yourself the chance to grow, even if it costs you the comfort of staying the same. Because one day, the people who couldn't handle your boundaries will watch you build something sacred with them. And the places that couldn't hold your healing will become the stories that shaped your strength. You're not failing. You're outgrowing. And that's what freedom looks like.